Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Josh Vickers, and I will be one of your moderators today. I'm with the Forensic Technology Center of Excellence at RTI International. This will be our first webinar in our AskCLAD Train the Director series. Today's webinar is entitled NIBIN Challenges and Opportunities. And before we do get started, I would like to hand the microphone over to Tim Scanlon to give us some opening words.
Thank you all for coming today. We appreciate your participation. So my name is Tim Scanlon. I am on the board of directors for AskCLAD, and I am the chair of the Training and Education Committee. And on behalf of the American Society of Crime Lab Directors, I want to welcome you to the Training Director Series. This is actually our second iteration of doing this program. This is the brainchild of Chris Dieters, who is one of your moderators, but also preceded me as chair. So I'm just following up on her good work. We have an exciting couple weeks planned, so if you have other lab staff that plan on attending, next week we have one on digital forensics, then we move on to fire debris and trace evidence. So every week we're trying to hit a subject matter within your laboratory that a crime lab director or administrator would be interested in learning more about and just getting a general idea of what's going on in the field. So I'm not going to take much of your time because y'all have a packed day today, but I just want to say thank you, and I've worked very closely with some of your presenters today with NIBIN and with Phoenix, and I think you're in for a great lecture today. Welcome to the series, and we hopefully we can see you and individuals from your lab throughout the 4 weeks. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Tim. We are going to go ahead and introduce all of our presenters today. We do have 4 subject matter experts. Our first is Mr. Benjamin Swanholm. He is the Assistant Crime Lab Administrator for the Phoenix Police Department and Laboratory Services Bureau. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Forensic Science and Criminal Justice from the University of North Dakota and a Master's in Criminal Justice Administration with an emphasis in Forensic Science Administration from Loyola University in New Orleans, and he is a certified public manager. He has worked for the Phoenix Police Department for the last 12 years. Our second presenter will be Miss Jessica Ellifritz. She is a criminal intelligence analyst with the Phoenix Police Department Violent Crimes Bureau, a crime gun intelligence unit. She graduated from Arizona State University in 2002 with a bachelor's in justice studies with an emphasis in sociology. She has worked for the Phoenix Police Department for 16 years and has been working with the crime gun intelligence unit since 2010. Our next presenter is Mr. Justin Beshaver. He is a forensic scientist manager and technical leader of the Firearm and Tool Marks section of the Utah Bureau of Forensic Services. He has a Bachelor's of Science in Biochemistry from Eastern Oregon University, and he began working at the UBFS in 2005 as a drug chemist and has trained in paint, trace, and crime scene. Justin then transferred to the Firearm and Tool Marks section in 2009 and completed the ATF's National Firearms Examiner Academy in 2010. Our last presenter I will introduce of the day is Ms. Jennifer Gelston. She is a senior forensic scientist and the NIBIN program administrator for the Utah Bureau of Forensic Services. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette and a master's degree in forensic science from the University of New Haven. She started her career in 2005 as a forensic technician at the Academia Crime Laboratory in New Iberia, Louisiana, and attended NIBIN acquisition training in 2006. In 2010, Jennifer completed the ATF's National Firearms Examiner Academy and transferred to the UBFS in 2012 as a firearm and tool mark examiner. Our quick disclaimer, the opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Any products and manufacturers discussed are presented for informational purposes only and do not constitute product approval or endorsement by the U.S. Department of Justice. And now, without any further ado, I would like to hand things over to our first presenter, Mr. Ben Swanholm.
Good afternoon, morning, or evening where all of you are. Glad you could join us, as Tim mentioned. Hopefully we'll be able to provide some information for you on some challenges and opportunities. So to start with, I'm the assistant administrator, as Josh previously mentioned, and Jessica will go into greater detail, but our NIBIN isn't actually within the laboratory, so that's kind of our highlight component of this. But I'm really going to be talking a little bit about some of the ATF rules and regulations, but I'm not speaking for ATF, nor are these necessarily 100% accurate. We tried to get someone from ATF to be able to provide that information, as well as be able to answer your questions accurately versus guessing. And because of the government shutdown, they are working unpaid, but they aren't allowed to do any training, as well as they also have a letter related to their minimum required operating standards, which I'll talk about in a second, that they're sending out. I don't know the contents of that letter, but it potentially will help and explain some of the concerns related to the MROSs and the NIBIN program. So hopefully once the government's back up and running, we get to a position where they'll be able to provide that, and that'll help some of the concerns or questions you may have as a part of your operations and the NIBIN program. So with that, I will start my part of the presentation here. So gun crime intelligence, or crime gun intelligence, is all about disrupting the shooting cycle. So we start with lawful commerce, where guns are bought or distributed as part of a normal course of business. Then that creates a pool of available firearms that are in the community, available for use lawfully and really unlawfully. So what ends up happening is that those pool of available firearms that were from lawful commerce were diverted through theft, straw purchases, or illegal sales, and those are the firearms that often result in what we call a shooter or a trigger puller when we talk about crime gun intelligence. So what we're trying to do is really identify the guns involved that have been diverted from lawful commerce, and to be able to increase the safety of the community in a timely fashion through the use of NIBIN. So the foundation of NIBIN is the computer automated system where you have entered high-resolution images of cartridge casings that have been found at a scene, where automatic comparisons occur. Then you have potential matches within hours. And the power of NIBIN is that it can link shootings that you didn't know were related, as well as it can link guns that have been recovered to shootings as well. There's also, when it comes to crime gun intelligence, there's also firearm tracing, a little outside of the scope of what we're talking about today, but I just wanted to include it as well because it's part of ATF's program for crime gun intelligence, where we're searching legal transfers of those lawful commerce purchase of firearms, and so we can identify where the purchases are occurring and or identifying straw purchasers because they're buying a lot of firearms over certain periods of time. And part of the premise of NIBIN and the MROs and why ATF has been really pushing for the inclusion of timely entries in NIBIN. This is a study that Rutgers did in 2018 out of the state of New Jersey, where they would often link two shooting events through NIBIN, and then 50% of the time, within 90 days, they would find another shooting or at least one shooting within 90 days of that same firearm being used. So once those firearms divert into criminal hands and they start being used by individuals who are trigger pullers and shooters as a course of their crimes, they get used frequently. So that's where this intelligence component and the timeliness need comes into play. The faster we can identify and develop leads, the faster we're able to get these guns and shooters off the street. So again, timely intelligence stops additional instances occur. That's the goal of this program. So these are some of their recommended practices. Comprehensive collection of all ballistic evidence. So hopefully you're not going, or this isn't occurring at scenes where you leave casings or cartridges at the ground, or they get kicked into the gutter, that sort of thing, that you're collecting all of the ballistic evidence from the scene to be able to enter that into NIBIN. An additional process that they recommend is also potentially a shot alert system, because there's often areas and communities that have high propensity for violence and shooters, and so they often don't notify law enforcement when a shooting has occurred. So by implementing these systems, you can identify these instances without waiting for someone to call emergency 911 to respond. Timely submission into NIBIN. They recommend within 24 hours. The MROs that I previously talked about is 24 to 48, but they, of course, would recommend, within 5 minutes. So, the faster you can get it in, that's what their goal is. And then the next 4 are really from the gun intelligence standpoint, not really a NIBIN and or processing, but just wanted to put it out there because not sure exactly the whole range of people attending. But documentation of circumstances, getting those leads that come from the NIBIN hits to investigators, following up on those leads, and then coordination of prosecution when someone has been identified as a perpetrator. So when it comes to comprehensive ballistic evidence, these are some more detailed recommendations that they have. So instituting a policy to recover and process all evidence, avoid laboratory policies that require a submitting agency to request to process recovered evidence through NIBIN. So essentially, and these next ones kind of lead to that, is don't put things in place that limit the ability of people to actually move forward with the process. So don't charge them a cost for submitting laboratory requests. Don't make it harder for them to bring evidence to you. Make it easy as possible for them to bring you evidence so it can go into NIBIN. And what they're also saying as a part of that MROS is that if they came in and audited your organization and they found you were limiting that, in the end, you're going to fail that audit in that respect. So again, identify and remove obstacles is pretty much their main goal there of this recommendation. And then timeliness, again, removing unnecessarily delays from procedures at the NIBIN site, transferring evidence, acquisition and correlation procedures, and then any other laboratory analysis. So if somebody wants DNA analysis on this firearm and or casing, figuring out a way so that's not limiting or delaying unnecessarily the evidence into being processed. And Jessica will go into this a little bit more, but that's one of the main reasons of our program and process that we developed, is that we don't have the capacity to handle the volume from a laboratory perspective. So we've had to develop solutions to try to meet the ATF and MRS goals and still try to do the best we can for the evidence and the cases that we have. The second is triaging ballistic evidence to use the best samples, so you're only entering the best samples versus everything, and then making the correlation process more technician-driven than firearm examiner-driven. So potentially, traditionally, all of the NIBIN and or correlation acquisition process went through or as a part of the firearm section of the laboratory. ATF's recommendation is that you develop a system that takes it out of the accredited component and firearm examiner-driven component of the laboratory to develop the intelligence. They're not saying that you can never or you shouldn't have any lab involvement process done at all, especially when it would say come to confirmations. But if you're just trying to provide intelligence to investigators, it can potentially be more technician-driven than firearm examiner-driven. And then establish a goal for a turnaround time. The MROS is 24 to 48 hours. And then process most recent evidence first. The reason is on that end is they believe that, we're looking for the active shooter. So if you have a backlog of 500 cases, focus on the new ones first, because those ones you're going to actually probably be able to do something with. The old cases, 6 months, a year, 5 years, you may not be able to actually do anything with those from the intelligence you develop, because that information is so old, and these guns have a good propensity to travel between different groups and peoples when they're involved in criminal procedures. And then the other is seek advice from other successful sites. We'll talk about this. In Utah, we'll talk, we're 2 different sites, a local site versus a state site, 1 customer versus multiple customers. So each environment and each successful site has different things that they've done that may be helping you or could help you to develop a program to make you reach the goals that exist in the MROS. So just a couple of summaries on the MROS. Really, I just put these here because these are the ones that they emphasize. I'm not necessarily saying that these are the only ones or these are the only important ones, but related to a lab, these are the ones that they emphasize. So the MROS became effective in 2018, and sites must undergo an ATF audit and be in compliance by 12/31/2020. In the MROS standard, it says that they potentially would remove the NIBIN network from your organization if you weren't in line with these standards. I don't know how hard and fast that is, if the government shutdown and that sort of stuff, if they have the resources to audit all the sites by those dates, but that's how it's listed in the MROS at this time. Then some of the specific standards, entering them within 2 days of receipt. Some of the way we're interpreting this is 2 business days of the receipt. So, if somebody collects it but they haven't impounded that item or delivered it to the site that can do the NIBIN entry, that the clock would only start at the time that's been received. Whether ATF reviews it as that way, I can't say for sure. Enter accurately the information. It seems relatively obvious. Correlate and conduct secondary reviews within 2 business days. Again, we're talking about timeliness. Disseminate leads within 24 hours. And maintain a program administrator, so somebody that's in charge of this. We would recommend having somebody that's not going to change in a year or in 6 months or 2 years. A lot of individuals on the sworn side transfer and promote outside of different details, so they may need to be someone from a civilian capacity that can maintain the integrity of the program over some time. And then have no policies that limit or inhibit submission. And then I think, that's the last one, is operate only with qualified NIBIN users. I think that makes relative obvious sense in that respect. So we're going to have Utah take over the next portion here, and then Jessica is going to come back and talk a little bit more about the Phoenix program that we've been running.
Thank you, Ben. Again, my name is Justin Bieshaver. I'm manager of the firearm and toolmark section. After Ben reviewed some of the MROSs, I hope that what you'll see from us is our attempt to implement as many of those as possible. Some of the challenges that we have with those MROSs is trying to get it outside of the crime lab. Obviously, for the state of Utah and the way we're set up, it doesn't quite work that well as easily. So we're kind of more firearm examiner driven, but we're trying to implement the ways the ATF would like us to in order to have the timeliness and the effectiveness and the accuracy of the NIBIN process. So to give you a little bit of background first about where we came from, we had NIBIN and IBIS, all of that, before I actually started in the laboratory in 2005. Approximately 2007, I think the ATF took it away, as they did with a number of labs that weren't producing the results that they needed. For instance for us, we had lack of agency participation. We would have agencies that would submit firearms only, or they would submit cartridge cases and firearms from homicide cases. We actually had a lot of Division of Wildlife guys trying to submit cartridge cases and that sort of thing. So what we found was we had a lot more firearms to compare against other firearms, not actually evidence samples or no gun cases and those types of things. We didn't populate the database appropriately. All of our casework, all of our entries were done on the back end of casework, which is, again, the old-fashioned way of doing things, and, again, more firearms submitted than evidence casings. In 2012, we hired Jennifer Gelston from the Acadiana Crime Lab, and she had NIBIN experience working with their agency. But, again, they were doing the no-gun cases that were entered immediately. So if they didn't have a firearm, those were entered immediately, but firearm comparison cases were entered later. All the hits that they did find were anywhere from 6 months to 2 years old, and so they weren't a whole lot of help at the time. If you fast forward to 2015, Sandy Grogan, a supervisor of our Weber Morgan CSI unit, which Weber County is a county in northern Utah, they had a homicide where they had 12 9mm Luger cartridge cases. A guy was shot 12 times. They had no suspects and no witnesses. So it was kind of an off-chance discussion with her where she asked if we as the firearms section could help. And I said, yeah, go ahead, send everything in. We'll take a look at it, see what we can do. And then I suggested that she research all of her other cases and see if there was any other cases that had similar calibers that was just sitting in their evidence vault. So long story short, over the course of approximately 10 months and a lot of work by Sandy Grogan, researching all of the cases that they had and bringing in a number of no-gun cases or firearms that they'd recovered, Jennifer manually linked 23 cases together and contributed to a state RICO case in which they shut down a gang that they had no idea was actually actively involved in all of these shootings. We did this the old-fashioned way. It was kind of a joke, but early on what examiners would do was they would take a Polaroid picture of cartridge cases and they'd post it on the wall. And as more cases came in, they would compare the photographs to each other to see if anything matched up. We did the same thing, but we did it with digital files. We kept files on the computers with photographs of the cartridge cases, and as new cases would come in, Jennifer would compare what she was looking at on the scope to what was already previously entered. And so, 10 months, 80 cases, something like that. We linked 23 of them together. It was about that time that we were trying to push our agency into purchasing a NIBIN acquisition system. We showed that the results were going to be effective. If we could get more cartridge cases entered into a system that would help us out, it would be more effective. 2016 to 17, we were getting a brand new building, and so I finally was able to convince our administration that this would be a good idea. We purchased a brass tracks and match point system through the laboratory and worked in conjunction with the ATF to get the line set up. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, who has streamlined our process immensely in order to make this an effective system for Utah.
Thanks, Justin. So when we were able to purchase the equipment, we'd already seen several presentations from other agencies like Denver and Seattle and from the ATF as far as using it as the screening tool instead of doing it on the back end of casework. So when we got the approval for the equipment, we needed to figure out how could we streamline our processes to make them more efficient and get those timely leads out. So we started with having just Justin and myself in the firearms section. So we needed a way to have quicker panels to fill out in our LIM system. We use BEAST. So instead of doing a full documentation of the firearm and a full examination, all we really needed to do was do a basic documentation of the info that we needed to put into the system and create a case in NIBIN. So your make, model, caliber, serial number, and also doing the safety checks for test firing. Those were our main issues. We didn't need to do all of our full documentation that we would normally do for a comparison. After we started doing NIBIN on our own, we then expanded to having agency representatives who were either willing to make their own test fires and submit them. So in that case, we needed a panel to just enter in all of the information from their test-fired firearms. So that required also educating the agency on what ammunition that we preferred to have them use. And then also we had a form that we started out with to have them fill out all the information we needed to put into NIBIN. We then morphed from that agency form to a pre-printed test fire envelope to make life easier. That way they weren't filling out all their case information twice. They could just fill it out on the outside of the envelope and they can just submit that to us. With cartridge cases, initially, if we had multiple cartridge cases submitted for a NIBIN case, we were documenting every cartridge case that came in. Of course, that's more time entering the information, and that's more time on the review process to make sure everything's correct. So what we decided to do is that since we're doing the screening process, if you have 10 cartridge cases submitted, we're screening them to see, do they all look similar? Do they all look like they could have been fired from the same gun? And then picking the best representative sample or samples and entering that into NIBIN. So when we started doing that, we figured that we could just document that one cartridge case and then have a comment section where we could note that if we entered in item 1, items 2 through 10 were not entered because they were similar to item 1, and that reduced the amount of time that we were entering information into our system. So there's just an example of our test fire envelope that we made for the agencies to use. It has all the information for them to fill out, their agency, their case number, item numbers, what crime type it was, the date it was collected, and all the firearm information and who their contact was. That's, as was mentioned before, having, well, with the NIBIN program administrator, having somebody who can stay and will be there for a while. That also goes for having a NIBIN contact for your agencies if you're going to have either other agencies submitting evidence to you. So since we're a state organization, we have a lot of outside agencies obviously submitting evidence to us. So that allows them to put their contact information, so if we have any questions, we can call them. And it's better to have one point of contact for that agency to minimize playing a telephone game. So on the back end, after doing the entries, when we do the correlation reviews, every agency gets an entry notification. It's a fillable PDF form that we created to make it easier that we can fill out with the case information, item numbers, what was entered, what was not entered, and why. But we also have a big, bolded, red statement that this is not a report, that this is just a notification. And also that we clarify that if you would like a full exam for court purposes, and that can be done separately. So there's an example of our entry form. So with us, we have evidence that's submitted to the lab. We also have agency reps from 2 different agencies that come in. They went to the acquisition training, and so they're entering in their own information. So we needed to have forms that were relevant to both sides. So this way we have, if it is submitted to the lab, we have our case number, our item numbers. We have the agency case number, agency item numbers. We do short descriptions of what was entered, as well as what was not entered and why. So down here, if you had multiple cartridge cases and they were all similar, we would put, you know, items 2 through 10 were similar to item 1, which was entered up here. And then a simple checkbox down here as far as whether or not we found any associations during the correlation reviews. Throughout the process, we found out that some of the agencies were confused as far as if we entered in multiple items, even though they were similar to each other. So we created a little note box. That way we could specify, hey, all 10 cartridge cases were similar, but item 1 had a nickel primer, item 2 had a brass primer. They marked a little bit differently, and that's why we entered in 2. So one of the things that we've done, and that seems to be working pretty well for us so far, is we actually have 3 tiers. We have a lead, a hit, and then our full exam. So with a lead, we're saying that we see 2 similar images in match point, but we didn't examine them on the scope. We can then have what we call a hit, a confirmed hit, which is where we examine those specific items that were entered into NIBIN on a microscope and reach a conclusion of ID. And then we have our full exam and comparison for court, where we tell them, you know, bring us everything in from those cases that we can do our full examination and get you an actual report for court purposes. So a lot of the times ATF and other agencies, they'll do either a lead or a confirmed hit, and they mean by a confirmed hit that they're looking at everything in the case. And so we've been able to retain the evidence in-house to make it easier. When we do test fires for firearms, we send the firearm back to the agency, but we're retaining the no-gun cases, test fires that are submitted by other agencies, and the test fires that we make. That way, if we do see something similar on match point, then we can immediately go to the locker, grab it, throw it up on the scope real quick, confirm it, and get that out. The few times that we have issued a lead, almost immediately within the next day or two, they had called back and wanted to confirm it to make sure that we would reach a conclusion of identification in order to use it for our warrants. So having the evidence in-house allows it to be quick and efficient to confirm those hits. It also helps if we need to look at other marks that are not imaged in the NIBIN system. So maybe we need to look at chamber marks or extractors or something else. We can do that on the microscope real quick. This is an example of our lead notification. So again, agency information, our information, distinguishing whether or not they're looking at a potential NIBIN lead where we didn't actually microscopically examine the evidence, or yes, we did examine it microscopically, but you still need to send everything in for a full exam for court purposes. Again, we added a notes box, and throughout the process of initiating the NIBIN program, we did form a CSIC, a Crime Gun Intelligence Center, and so now we have reps from our Utah State Bureau of Investigation and our ATF regional office that are available for contact if the agencies need. We will be moving to a tiered priority system. We're in the process of defining 1, 2, and 3 priorities as far as whether or not the agency will receive follow-up contact from the CJIC. That also includes our statewide information and analysis center. We have an analyst there who creates the information packet and researches the cases to see what information is linked, and they put together a neat little diagram showing any similarities, if the vehicles were similar, suspects are similar, who's linked to which case, and so on and so forth. And that's been working out really well for the agencies also. So with our agency participation, they can either submit all the evidence to the lab, they can test fire their own firearms and submit them just using the envelopes that we had created, or the agency can send a representative to acquisition training, and then they come in, put their evidence in, and then they leave with it. The ones that have done that are close enough to where if we see something that we'd like to confirm on the microscope, it's easy enough to call them and have them bring that in within 24 hours. So the main challenges that we've had with manpower, well, obviously we started out with just Justin and myself, and then our workload increased tremendously. Because of that, we were able to request more help and get additional support from our local agencies. Having the local agencies submit test fires instead of having to process the gun is a lot more efficient and quicker. Educating our agency reps in a state crime lab setting as far as we're not handling guns that are well maintained, and so making sure that if they are doing test fires that they're being safe when they do it. And also letting them know what other exams we can do besides NIBIN that we can help them out with later if they need. Another issue we had was since we built the program from the ground up, ATF and our SBI reps were working from the top down with the chiefs and sheriffs and making sure that everybody was getting on board. And so when we met in the middle, there were some communication and chain of command issues that we had to work out as well. We are always continuously improving and streamlining the process. And the main thing that we've been running into is educating what we mean by a lead, a hit, and a full exam.
So, again, some of our solutions are staying flexible and accepting that constructive criticism from outside agencies. If the agency, if you're in constant communication with your customers and you have regular meetings with your NIBIN contacts and that, it became apparent to us, like for example, that we didn't have a comment section and agencies were getting confused as to what was being entered and why. So by putting in that little comment box, it's helped immensely when we say, all right, you submitted 5 cartridge cases, 3 of them had nickel primers, 2 of them had brass primers, and due to the different markings between the brass and the nickel, we put 2 of those in, but the rest of them are all similar. And so they know that all of their evidence is getting looked at and it's getting screened, but we're putting in the best that we have to. Having the agencies perform their own test fires has been a great help as well, like Jennifer said, but also training a couple of the agency reps. For example, Unified Police Department, they have 2 people that they trained to do NIBIN acquisitions, and we trained them to bring them into the laboratory, shoot into our water tank. They do all their safety checks in front of us in case they have any questions. They use our water tank. They bring some ammunition to help out with that. Then they go right into doing their acquisitions. And the great thing about that is that they get to keep all of their evidence. So they walk in with all their evidence, do all of their analysis, and walk back out with all of their evidence. I know I've seen on some of this asking about accreditation. The firearms section is accredited. We're switching over to ANAB soon. While NIBIN itself isn't in the accreditation scope yet, we're still debating on whether or not we need to work into that. But there is a process that you can do to allow these agencies to come into your accredited lab and perform the work that they need and then go back out. And it requires a background check and all of those other functions that you would normally have. Having the increased communication and weekly meetings with the ATF, SBI, and our SIAC groups also helps with, like Jennifer was saying, with those chain of command issues and that sort of thing. We've worked through a bunch of little issues here and there, and I think we're headed in the right direction. I think that's about it from us right here. So I'll turn it back over. Communication again.
So this is Jessica Elifritz with Phoenix Police Department, and I'm going to kind of give you our structure, which is quite different from, I think, probably a majority of you folks. Obviously here in Phoenix, we are just the local agency. It's just Phoenix Police Department, and our NIBIN program exists almost completely outside of our lab. It is actually embedded within our investigations detail, and our group consists of both civilians as well as sworn detectives that are actually part of our unit here. Just to give you an idea of our volume here in Phoenix, just our own agency alone impounds somewhere around 430 firearms in a month. So of that, we end up processing somewhere around 3,100 guns a year. That is just the test fires and the firearms. We also process somewhere close to about 2,200 bags of cartridge cases a year. When it's all said and done, this last year we ended up with a total of 411 NIBIN leads that we were able to identify for the items that we did process. Even though we are just our local police department, we obviously here in Phoenix are surrounded by a whole ton of other smaller agencies, both regular agencies as well as tribal agencies. And several years ago, our previous boss set up a system where he reached out to all of the surrounding agencies who could not afford to purchase the actual NIBIN equipment, the IBIS system, and invited them to come and use our equipment. He recognized that crime obviously crosses borders over the different cities and towns around us, and the importance of everybody in the Valley to be part of the program. So as a result of that, all of those surrounding agencies come to our office to actually do the entries into NIBIN themselves for all of their own evidence. That has been a huge benefit for us in an intelligence and investigative area because it has given us direct contact to those agencies, and we've built those relationships with those agencies that has paid off during investigations that cross over the different borders. It also helped us because as a result of that, there became a very large increased need for individuals here in the Valley to be trained. And myself and one of our detectives are both NIBIN authorized trainers. So we do all of our training for the state of Arizona here on site in the Phoenix Police NIBIN lab, or the NIBIN office outside of the lab. So we currently have somewhere around 22 agencies that come in and do their own acquisitions at our office, but we have trained all of those personnel here on site, both acquisition and correlation training. Impounding procedures. We recognized a long time ago that we had to change our impounding procedures. I'll give you a little bit of the backstory. Phoenix has actually had NIBIN since about 2009, so we've had our equipment for quite a long time. But the way that it started and the way it's done now is completely different. We started kind of similar to what Utah mentioned, in that a lot of the NIBIN testing was being done on the back end after cases were done, before guns were being released. And it was about 2012 when ATF started to kind of talk about the timeliness factor and trying to get those items processed at the beginning versus at the end of investigations. So we started about 2012 making small changes to our actual procedures to try to speed up the process. I want to say 2016, 2017 is when we really made major changes to try to hit that 48-hour goal that ATF is asking everybody to meet. One of the things that we have done with our impounding procedures has been education, and that is that educating the people who are impounding the items of different things that they can do to help speed up the process when it gets to us. One of the big things we started doing is we went out and educated all of our crime scene personnel and all of our patrol officers that when they impound cartridge cases at scenes, they are placing each cartridge case in an individual vial with the head stamp up. And then they can place all those vials into one evidence package for us. And what that allows us to do is we can, when those items come to the NIBIN office to be processed, it allows us to pre-screen them under the microscope without having to touch them or handle them. That way, the only one that we select to enter into the machine is the only one that we touch. And then all the rest of them are preserved for DNA and or prints at a later time. We built up a partnership with our property warehouse because knowing that all of our evidence goes to one warehouse, we had to have a way to easily retrieve that ballistics, the firearms, and the casings from that warehouse as fast as possible. And we were able to come up with agreement with them as everything shows up at the warehouse, they put it into one location for us, and we go and retrieve those items every single day. That has allowed us to get the cartridge cases from the scenes, usually the day after the incident has occurred, as well as any firearms that were impounded. We, at this point now, can pick up those items the day after the occurrence. So, as it relates to prints and DNA, our biggest hurdle here in Phoenix was specific to prints and DNA and how we were going to preserve those on the instances when we needed them, but still be able to meet our timeliness guidelines. We actually brought in our county prosecutors and our crime lab personnel, as well as the command staff from the NIBIN program. We got everybody in a room together and have done multiple meetings specifically to discuss prints and DNA, want versus need. Everybody wants prints because just in case, but when do you actually need prints? So we were able to establish a solid definition of when we absolutely need prints on items that both the county attorney's office agrees with, our lab personnel agree with, and our NIBIN program agrees with. When it was all said and done, it turned again into an education for our internal folks within the police department, our investigators, and educating them as to when we actually need the prints to be done ahead of time and when we can bypass prints and just collect DNA and shoot the gun. The crime lab does not have the resources to process the volume that Phoenix gets and still meet that 2-day turnaround, which is, again, why the NIBIN program here in Phoenix exists outside of the lab and at an investigator level. We also did a 3-tier prioritization where we are actually ranking our crimes to determine what level of processing is going to be done. A lot of it has to do with violence level, type of crime, impact on society, and we have changed our swabbing procedures to be able to expedite the process, and we are only doing prints on a case-by-case basis.
The tier 1 is all your violent crimes, your homicides, officer-involved shootings, mass fatalities, anything that's designated high profile. Our personnel, our NIBIN group folks will actually go out to the crime scene on the tier 1 cases and retrieve the cartridge cases or the firearms directly from the scene and bring them straight back to the office. Assuming that they don't determine that there's a need for prints, we then are only swabbing the areas of the firearm necessary to actually shoot the gun. We're leaving all of the smooth areas, and we're only swabbing the grip, the trigger, the muzzle, all the buttons and levers, and we're leaving all of the smooth areas available for prints if there's determined a need after the fact. But we are retaining the DNA on the front end. And then we're test firing the gun using clean techniques that basically means that, you know, we're changing gloves, we're using new supplies and everything with every test fire. Tier 2 kind of falls into all of our drive-by shootings, MIWs, which is misconduct involving weapons, found guns, that sort of thing. In these instances, we've taken the decision-making away from the investigators, and our NIBIN individuals themselves are making the decision on when DNA is needed or not. And we are basing it strictly off of whether or not the gun was recovered off of a person or whether the gun was found someplace else or recovered someplace else. If the gun is found on a person, we have the okay from our county attorney's office to proceed without DNA or print collection and move straight to test firing the firearm. If the gun is not found on a person, we are, again, swabbing those areas that we need to swab, the rough areas, the textured areas, and then we're test firing the firearm. Our tier 3 crimes are the stuff that's recovered at at pawn shops, forfeited items. We're not swabbing those at all. We're just going straight to test firing those. One of the things we have seen in us changing our procedures, both how we're swabbing stuff, that need versus want in prints, the successes we have seen have happened because of the relationships that we have built in creating this program. By bringing our county attorney's office in on the discussion as to how we're processing stuff, getting their buy-in, they know now exactly what we're doing with our evidence on the front end, and we have their support in what we're doing. Has helped tremendously. Our relationship with our crime lab, even though we exist outside of the lab, our lab administrators are very much so involved in some of our decision making as to how we're processing DNA. They help us come up with what's the best procedure. They're there in all the meetings with us, with the county attorney's office, so that we can make sure that we're processing this evidence in a way that's going to benefit everybody and still meet the timeliness guidelines. I use this specific incident that happened just this summer as a real picture of the success of why this has worked for us. Some of you may or may not know this gentleman. Dr. Stephen Pitt was a victim of a homicide here. He was a well-known forensic psychologist. This incident right here just is a perfect example of when timeliness works. In this specific instance, Dr. Stephen Pitt was killed the evening of May 31st. There were 2 cartridge cases left behind at the scene. 6 a.m. that next morning, the homicide detective at that scene called me on my cell phone on his drive-in and said, I have 2 casings from a homicide. We need to get these in ASAP. This is going to be a high-profile homicide. He met me at the office. He hand-delivered the cartridge cases to me. I got them into the system immediately. At that point, there was no leads to it. 2 o'clock that afternoon, Scottsdale Police Department, so another agency, had a double homicide of 2 paralegals, but it was Scottsdale shares a border with Phoenix. It was right over the border of Phoenix and Scottsdale. They had a double homicide of the 2 paralegals. Having our connections with individuals at Scottsdale, because of the fact they come to our office to do their entries, our NIBIN folks went directly out to that crime scene with Scottsdale. The crime scene folks at Scottsdale printed in DNA the cartridge cases on scene, turned them over to us here in Phoenix. We came back, we got them in the system, and we were able to tell all the investigators by 2 o'clock that afternoon that the double homicide in Scottsdale was related to our Phoenix murder of Stephen Pitt. 9 o'clock that night is when we identified that. So by 9 o'clock that night, we had linked the 2 cases together. Right about midnight, Scottsdale had another homicide of a marriage counselor. Again, because of the 2 homicides from the previous day, Phoenix was able to get our hands on those casings almost immediately. The Scottsdale folks actually hand-delivered those casings to us, and we were able to get those in the system. By doing it this way, we were able to link the 3 different homicide scenes with the 4 victims across 2 different jurisdictions in 36 hours. It was a huge success for us, and it showed how the partnerships and having those agreements ahead of time really had an impact on how fast we were able to move. Unfortunately, the gentleman was not done yet. The very next day, his ex-wife reached out to us and said, I believe this is my husband. He knew that the victims had been advertised and made public through a press conference. She recognized all of the victims, said, I think it's my husband. When we had gotten the original cartridge cases from the Stephen Pitt homicide, one of our detectives swabbed those casings. I'm sorry, I take that back. The Scottsdale, who had swabbed those casings beforehand, had got a partial DNA profile off of the cartridge cases left at the scene. Yes. So the original Phoenix ones with Stephen Pitts had the partial DNA profile on them. What ended up happening is when the wife reached out to us, she had a son. And our Phoenix Police Air Support Unit flew our detectives to Flagstaff, Arizona to obtain a buccal swab from the teenage son. Scottsdale P ended up doing the DNA comparison to the DNA profile found on the cartridge cases in the Phoenix homicide, and we got the YSDR hit confirming him as the suspect. That same night, they found another double homicide out in Fountain Hills, Arizona. Unfortunately, in this incident, he had smartened up and he collected his shell casings from the scene, so there are no cartridge cases left at the scene. But the victims were known to Dwight Jones and his ex-wife, so we were able to connect it that way. The following morning, he was involved in an officer-involved shooting when police tried to take Dwight Jones into custody. Again, the relationships we built with our county attorney's office that allowed us to set the standards of when we're going to collect prints, when we're going to need DNA, and how we're going to process that allowed us to speed up that process. And then having it be embedded in that investigations level allowed us to work within an investigations environment to get our hands on that evidence almost immediately after the incident, so that we could get that information to the case agents as quickly as possible. Again, lessons learned, credibility and trust. By bringing our crime lab administrators in on how we do things, even though we don't actually exist under the lab, they have confidence that what we're doing is accurate and that we're not missing anything as it pertains to the prints and DNA. By bringing in the prosecutors in on the conversation, they're aware of what we're doing. They know what's going to come through. All of our cases get marked as CJIT cases and go directly to the investigators who handle just our crime gun intelligence cases. So it has benefited us on the prosecution side as well. A lot of the detectives now are actually calling us from the crime scenes because we are getting them involved in this. They now are reaching out to us from the crime scenes to get our help in expediting their evidence. The biggest battle, again, kind of to wrap it up, the biggest battle Phoenix faced was that forensic versus ballistic battle. That getting the forensic evidence is still incredibly important, but we're letting the intelligence drive the investigations versus having the forensics drive the investigations. So by expediting the ballistic evidence, we can build that intelligence, and then after the fact, that intelligence will then determine what sort of forensic processes need to be done.
So we can open the floor now, I think, Josh, for questions if we have time.
Okay, so this is Chris Dieters. I want to welcome everybody yet again for coming to today's presentation. This was an amazing presentation. We had over 240 people attend this, and that doesn't even count the locations that we had multiple attendees at each login. What we're going to do is we're going to grab a couple of questions, but because we have a hard stop in about 5 minutes, we're going to go ahead and take the questions that we've gathered throughout this presentation and turn them back to the presenters offline. And I'll help to work with them to get some answers that we can send out to all of the participants. So RTI, the FTCOE will be sending you out an archive link so that you can review this presentation again, and we will send those questions, the FAQ, if you will, with that. But I just want to point out there's a couple of downloads that if you want to look at the PowerPoint presentations, and I'm going to grab just a couple of questions, maybe one from each presenter. And so this one is for Ben. Ben, can someone elaborate on the MROS that says you can't limit to the law enforcement agencies or something? It was pretty quick, but it was the second from the bottom on that one slide.
So the last slide would have been have no policies that inhibit or restrict NIBIN submissions by service law enforcement agencies and departments. So you don't have any policies that limit or restrict someone from submitting a casing and or a gun to be entered into NIBIN.
Okay, and this one's for you, Jennifer. Do you know how many submissions you have to complete to maintain NIBIN access, or if anybody else on the panel knows this answer?
I have not been given a requirement. My understanding previously when machines were being removed from various locations was that they were not finding enough hits to warrant having a machine there, but I don't know if there was an actual number given for either submissions or associations found.
And this is Jessica. I can give what I've been told. I know that here in Arizona we've had a couple agencies get their machines pulled, and the justification that we were given at the time was that it had to do with competency and accuracy of those entries. For some agencies that were only doing entries once every 2 or 3 months, there was some concern as to them, let's say put it this way, they were worried that those people were going to forget how to do the entries, and then therefore the entries were not going to be of good quality, and that they weren't doing enough entries to keep up their competency in how to do them. Now, whether or not that's still the case, or if they've changed gears and are leading it more towards a thought process of, are these agencies taking the necessary steps to meet these new standards? And if they're not taking the necessary steps, then we're going to pull the equipment. I think that's yet to be seen as to how ATF will react to it.
And Justin, you mentioned accuracy. Does anybody have, and do you have a error rate that you could share with us about false matches using your methodology, or if there's been any studies that talk about the reliability of those leads?
So when I was talking about accuracy, I was meaning more along the lines of what Jessica was talking about, putting the cartridge cases in correctly, screening and picking the best one, and understanding why the techs need to look at the breech face marks and understand what marks they're actually looking at to put them in and to give you the best results. I don't have any numbers as far as an error rate goes. I know there's been a couple of examples where Jennifer's doing the correlations and her firearms background has helped, where she looked at it and said, you know, there's something there, but it's probably not enough for a lead. And so we'd pull the evidence and we'd be able to find more agreeable breech face marks or shear marks or chamber marks or something like that that resulted in a fairly low match on the NIBIN system, but was in fact a hit. I know there's a couple studies, I don't remember exactly off the top of my head who did them, but I think maybe from Denver PD or something, where they were talking about with the new algorithms going through the top 20 or 30 or so would give you a likely 99% confidence that you could you would find a hit within those numbers. Again, I can't quote me on those, but I can try to find any of those papers that would be helpful.
I believe we're running into our end stop here today, so I want to turn it over to Josh for just a closing on some instructions about how we can do
All right, thank you so much, Chris, and thank you again to all of our presenters. Definitely appreciate all of the research and hard work that you all have put into this presentation. Excuse me. Just so everyone knows, we do have our presentations down here in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen in the file share pod. So before you do leave, go ahead and click on those and click the download files button. That way you can have access to the presentations before you leave today. We have recorded today's event. We will be converting it into our archival version over the next couple of days. Once we get that finished, we will be sending out the archival link as well as the fact sheet that Chris had mentioned. That way you can get all of the answers to all of the questions that unfortunately we were not able to get answered today. We definitely appreciate all of the audience's participation and interaction with each other in the chat pod. It's great to see everyone giving out information and resources to each other. We want to make sure that we are a part of a community, and we definitely appreciate everyone's willingness to jump in on that as well. This is, again, just the first webinar in our AskCLAD Train the Directors series. We will be sending out information on the rest of the series, as well as you will see Julian populating some stuff there in the chat pod as well. So make sure to check out our website and then check out the other webinars that we do have in the series. Once those links come up, we also have links for our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, as well as our podcast. So make sure you follow us on all of our social media pages, as well as the podcast for all of our FTCOE offerings. Again, thank you to all of our presenters. Thank you so much, AskCloud, for helping us put this on. And we will see everyone hopefully next week, next Thursday on the 31st for the next webinar in our series. We hope everyone has a great afternoon.